Guys, today I'm going to go over how to build your own engine harness. It's Christmas here. It's about 70 degrees in South Carolina, so I figured this is the perfect time. I have a little bit of a cold, so kind of bear with me here if I start coughing. But anyway, if your harness looks like this, and it's been butchered and cut on and whatnot, you should throw it away because it's trash. And I'm going to show you how to build a new one. So, what happens a lot of times is people, this particular car was a mod motor and it swapped over to smart coils, so he needed to run power inside of the harness. And by doing so, he kind of just peeled some stuff back, taped some trailer wire or something in there, and then, tried to run power inside of the harness. Looked like trash. A lot of butt splices everywhere. There's multiple over and over again, a lot of redundant butt splices, a bunch of tape, all this kind of stuff. So this harness was sent to me in the mail by a guy who was hoping that I could, salvage it. And then after about a 5-minute phone call with him, he understood that it was no point, and I gave him a price on building a new harness, and he was happy with it. So I started on it yesterday. I did make a post about this, kind of showing some of the failures with this, and this is me cutting it apart. So it wasn't like this when I got it. But I wanted to kind of go over and document some tips on how to build an engine harness for the car so that it doesn't look like crap and it performs. So the first thing you do with your harness, if it looks like this, is you throw it. And then we're going to start over. So now we're going to start over. We've got some measurements, okay? So this customer's car, you notice I have top and bottom written here. He's got 2 holes in the firewall. Some of the stuff comes out of the top hole and some of the stuff comes out of the bottom hole. So just to clean up the engine bay, there's some things like go down to the crank. The crank sensor goes out the bottom, so does the O2 sensor. Anyway, none of that really matters. These are just kind of tips on how to go about doing this to make your harness nice and clean and reliable, and probably lose a bunch of weight in the process of doing it. So the first thing we do is I ask for a measurement from the ECU, right? So from the plugs on the ECU to wherever it's going to go through the firewall. So in some instances, this will be your firewall bulkhead connector. In this scenario, it's going to have, we're going through some Earl's grommets, the big 3-inch round grommets, the aluminum, flange on them, and then a rubber grommet on the inside. So it's 64 inches to the bottom one and 68 inches to the top one. Now it's not just 4 inches apart, it's actually about 18 inches apart, but where the branch is going to happen, where they split, there's a difference in length. So typically when you're measuring this kind of stuff, the first thing that I typically like to recommend is using maybe an old AN hose if you have it, or some heavier gauge wire, just so that it kind of simulates the diameter of what your harness is going to be when you're all done. So using a single strand of wire, if you do plan on adding, a couple inches to each measurement. So I like to use, maybe an 8 or a 10 AN hose that you've got sitting around. It's old fuel hose or something like that. So anyway, get your measurements, right? So we've got a measurement here to the firewall, and then I've got 14 inches, and I put this all in a nice Excel spreadsheet because my handwriting's terrible. But we've got 14 inches to the passenger side coils, and it comes out of the top. And we've got 22 inches to the driver's side coils, and it comes out of the top. All these measurements were given to me by the customer. So I'm building it to the way he told me to. Then we've got 14 inches to the injectors, but that one comes out of the bottom, right? So in order to pin out our injectors, we're going to have to add 14 inches to the bottom measurement of 64. So you get it. We have all of our measurements. And then what I do is, this is just, when I'm on the phone with them, I kind of scratch this out. And then we need to know about power, right? So where are we going to power it from? So the factory harness has got a relay and a fuse in there. Then if you had smart coils, you have another relay and fuse. And it's kind of a pain because it's ugly and it takes up a bunch of space. So I use these. These are the MSD, four gang relay block, solid state. They're triggered by either ground or power. And this is what I typically use to power injectors, coils. So they're rated for, I think, 20 amp continuous. But continuous is like hours of use, where intermittent, there's a whole spreadsheet on them, but they'll run up to 70 amps of inrush. Like, so if you wanted to run a fan off of them, you could. You can also pair two sets together, and then these are your trigger wires. So what I did was I got a measurement for him as to where the power wire was going to break out of the harness. Okay, so this one's already done. All right, this is the J2B connector. All right, so this is J2B, and this J2B is where your injectors and your coils are at. Okay, so I like to try to keep them all together. So J2B power right here, 4 leads for power, right? So 1 for each bank of coils, and then 1 for each side of the engine for injectors. Okay, so the injectors don't draw much, if anything, but I always like to oversize power, because you never know, he may want to go to a set of build atomizer 850s or something like that. So when it comes to injectors, I always try to oversize everything. And then coils, I've got a 14 gauge to each bank of coils. So as you can see here, here's the connector for each coil. I label them: passenger coil, driver coil. And but when we're about to build this, right, this can kind of be confusing, because it only says passenger coils, driver coils, and injectors here. So what I like to do is I build an injector harness. And what you do is you're going to stub out your lead to the length that you have up here, right? And populate your injector harness. So these are colors that I have historically used on everything, just so it's easier for me to follow. It's also in order of how I have them stacked on my cable reel up on the wall. But I put, cylinder number 1, it's yellow, B19. So J2 B19 is where that belongs. All right. Now some of this stuff you may be listening to me and go, oh, this is easy stuff. Either way, y'all send me enough messages to ask me questions about, well, which one's which. It's pretty simple to hunt this information down, and it's even easier to just write it down on a piece of paper. I put all this into a spreadsheet for the customer, but just so that he has a point of reference. But if you're building this yourself, it's a heck of a lot easier to take this piece of paper and tape it to your workbench and just reference it, okay? If you notice, I do the exact same color labeling for the smart coil sub-harness, right? So you've got an injector and you've got a coil plug at each cylinder. Why not make a match? So something simple, you know what I mean? So yellow is number one on both of them, right? So when you're going to plug in your coils and your injectors, first you're going to label them, but if for some reason you lose the label, number 1's yellow on both of them. So if you look down and you go, well, I got a yellow one on number 1 coil, but I got a brown one on number 1 injector, there's your problem. So just some simple stuff to keep in mind, okay? Now, once we have all that written out, we have to go over to the rest of the engine harness. So I took these numbers here, right? I added them all up and I made it a little bit neater so it's easier to follow. So passenger coils, driver side coils, injectors, got cam and crank, which we use the 3-wire shielded stuff from Holley. So this is the 3-wire, the 3-conductor shielded cable from Holley is what I use when I build these. So we cut those to length, cam and crank, and then O2 sensor, right? So we use the 7-conductor shielded stuff from Holley as well, right here. So this is the 7-conductor shielded stuff from Holley. So we cut that to our length right here, and then we've now the hardest part of all of this typically is splitting your 5-volt and ground, which is, I just made a video on how to do that the way I do it, but make it easy for yourself. Write down a length, okay? Write down, this is your map sensor, it's 88 inches long. I'm going to use red wire, and it's going to be 22 gauge, okay? Coolant temp, it's 88 inches, brown. All these are 22 gauge, that's why I didn't continue to write it. And then it's pin location, okay? So when you are building this, you don't have to continue to go back to the laptop, look at this, look at that, make sure it's right. Just write the stuff down. I mean, it's a simple step that a lot of people seem to overlook, but it works really well for me. It always has. And at the bottom of this, like I started off this video, he's got 2 holes through the firewall, 2 grommets. We're going to split the top and bottom at 50 inches. So we want to make sure that we don't go beyond 50 inches with the same, with the from the ECU to here. So if you know your splits at 50 inches, you know that if you've got anything coming out of the top and bottom for 5 volt and sensor ground, you need to make that split before 50 inches. So just kind of lay these things out for you. So this is J2B. This one's all done. I'm not going to go into concentric twisting and all that kind of stuff because most of y'all don't care. So this is J2B. This harness is already done and it's ready to go. The only thing left is I just got to put some labels on each one of these wires to say injector power, coil power passenger side, and then coil power driver side, stuff like that. So that one's done. Now I started on J2A. So if you look over here, the device is coming loose. There we go. So if you look over here, I started on J2A. This is when I decided to do this video. I was already, halfway through this. So here's your O2 sensor cable. All right. Now what I'll wind up doing is I'll put a piece of adhesive line heat shrink over this to seal this off, make it look a little nicer. This is your cam and crank. And this is probably the most intricate part of what you'll have to do when you build your own harness. And that is to join your cam and crank ground and your cam and crank power. So if you notice, this is loose. So this customer has got the stock sensors for a mod motor, so it doesn't use this. Okay, they're not powered. Typically, this would run over here to J2B20 like this, but they're not used. It's a 2-wire sensor. So we've got ground and we got signal. That's all we got here. Now, the reason I populated this is just in case the customer ever decides that he wants to put a Hall effect sensors in them. All he has to do is cut this to length and crimp a pin on, which I'll tape on. I'll wind up taping this here like this, and zip tying a pin around the cable so that he can access it later if he wants. So that's your cam and crank. If you're an LS guy and you're watching this wire right here would typically tap into A26 for your 58X application right here. All right, so you would tap in like this in order for you to gain 5 volt for your cam and crank. Or if you're a 24X application where it needs 12 volt, this wire would go over to J2B20 or J1B20, sorry, J1B20, not J2. So this would be your 24X application where it needs 12 volt. This here would be your 5 volt application for 58X. Once, typically what I like to do is work from right to left. So get your O2 sensor done, CAN bus done, right? Twisted pair for CAN bus. Then you got your cam and crank. And now you've got all your other sensors. We're gonna touch this last. So now you got all your other sensors. We've already written down our lengths and our colors. So we go back to our sheet over here and we reference, hey, map sensor's red, it's 22 gauge and it's gonna go to A23, plug it in, crimp your pins, plug it in. And now you've got a nice laid out, non-jumbled mess at your ECU, all right? So when these are our sensor 5 volt and ground, and what we'll need to do here is we're gonna have to branch off to feed all these other sensors, the corresponding things that they need, like the 5 volt reference and the ground that they need to operate. So I made another video on how to, kind of how to do that inside of the harness. So watch that in order to see how to do it. But typically I like to run these out as far as I can before a branch has to happen. And then I make one connection in line. I don't make 6 different connections. I don't like to daisy chain them because there's multiple failure points. You make one connection and you run them out to each individual sensor. So, but make that connection as far down the line as you can. And then last but not least, these right here are that first thing I was talking to you about, which was your jumbled mess that you had going on at the ECU with relays and whatnot. Well, we need to trigger this, right? So since we need to trigger this, right, what we're going to do is we're going to use A2, which is the fuel out signal. It's a 12-volt signal out of the ECU, and it tells the relay to turn on to provide power for your fuel pump and whatnot. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out of that lead right here. I use 2HDTM plugs, but you can do whatever you want. The green wire is going to trigger this whole relay block. So this whole relay block is going to go live when that ECU tells it to. And then this is our switched power, right? So this is A10. So this is what actually turns on the ECU. So I like to just typically populate them to the same connector so they're nice and clean and easy to remove. I like to make all these harnesses modular so you don't have to cut anything in order to take anything apart. So hopefully some of you learned something from all this and you didn't think I was just useless rambling. But hopefully you guys can start building, your own harnesses, or if you're not comfortable building your own harness, I also do it. If you contact me, I will say I'm not exactly, I don't exactly have a whole bunch of free time. I'm rather backed up building harnesses and wiring cars, but you can shoot me a message if you're interested in me building something. But just understand that you're going to have to have a lot of information for me in order for me to do the job the way I want to do the job for you. So anyway, Merry Christmas, and I hope you all have a Happy New Year. See ya.